A week ago Thursday, I was treated to a special occasion. A week ago Thursday, the Toronto Maple Leafs were playing in Buffalo at the KeyBank Centre, and my son said that he could get tickets, which he did, and he brought down some friends from Waterloo along with him, and the four of us went to the game. Now that's a rare opportunity for me and for us these days. I have a cousin that played for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He broke into the league 1 year ahead of the Buffalo Sabres. And for most of the time that he was with Toronto, those of us who were in NIagara went routinely to Buffalo Sabres games when the Leafs were in town. And some of my fondest memories, one I remember in that first year of the Buffalo Sabres being at Buffalo, was going out after the game with the Toronto Maple Leafs team. I don't know where they were going next, but they were staying overnight at the Statler Hilton in Buffalo. And at about 11 o'clock after the game, the team gathered around a large table and started eating. I was 10 years old at the time. I had Ron Ellis on one side of me and Norm Ullman on the other, and for those who don't follow hockey, they were among my Toronto Maple Leafs growing up. So that was amazing. It was also amazing how much beef these guys could put away at 11 o'clock at night. And that still burned into my memory. And my cousin was a defenseman. A guy by the name of Bobby Bond took him under his wing and taught him about defensive hockey and that. And they were talking with my dad further down the table about that. And across was the captain at the time, Dave Keon, and other people that I can still tell you their numbers at this point in time. In more recent times, I don't go to a lot of hockey games, and to be honest, this was the first time that I'd gone to the United States since my stroke. For a whole year, I wasn't allowed to go there. I could go to Northern Ontario, but not to Buffalo for lunch or something like that. So when Malcolm got a hold of these tickets, actually behind Phil Housley, only a couple of rows up from the Buffalo bench, we decided to go. Now, the Leafs were on a back-to-back. They played Wednesday and they were going to play Thursday. And on Wednesday, a current Leaf by the name of James Van Riemsdyk had scored 3 goals. Does anyone here know what that's called in hockey? A hat trick. Okay. So on Wednesday in Toronto, people had thrown their hats onto the ice because James Van Riemsdyk had a hat trick. Well, early in the game on Thursday, James Van Riemsdyk had scored 2 goals. And my son and I looked at each other because we had hats on our heads that we did not want to throw on the ice. It was 2 days before St. Patrick's Day, and so my son had worn his Toronto St. Pat's jersey. It's a heritage jersey because that's what the Leafs were called before they were the Maple Leafs. And he had a hat to match, and there was no way he was going to throw that on the ice. I had a hat that is new to me as well. This one celebrates the new old logo of the team, but it has Glennie embroidered on it and 24. That was my cousin's name and number. And there was no way I was throwing this hat on the ice either. As it turns out, we didn't have to make that decision. Although the Leafs won, 5-2 I think it was, James Van Riemsdyk, after that early rally in the first period, didn't score again. So we didn't have to throw our caps out onto the ice. Now, some years ago, I ran into a woman who said that she went through thrift stores and she went through clearance bins so that she wouldn't have to make that kind of a decision. She would go and get, even though she might have a Buffalo Bills hat or some other hat that was important to her, she would get a second one that was either used or from children or old or whatever. So she didn't have any trouble throwing that hat onto the ice. I also remember a couple of years ago when the Blue Jays were playing, and they still had my favorite player on that team, Edwin Encarnacion. And Edwin managed, he did this a couple of times, but he managed on that day to score 3 home runs in the game, and the one that came, the third one that came in the 7th inning was a Grand Slam home run. And so, being Toronto, hats started pouring onto the field from all over the stadium, and he was mystified. I should bring my Edwin stuff out. Does anyone want to buy an Edwin Encarnacion sweater? You do? I even had a parrot for when he did score runs. It was interesting because Encarnacion had no idea what was going on when hats started raining down on the field. And ABC News actually ran a little clip of this and said they knew that Toronto was hockey territory, but he figured that hockey and baseball were coexisting nicely because the fans there were throwing their hats on the field when Edwin had his 3 home runs. One guy said he had to make a decision because he was in the stands, he was in one of the upper bowls, and he had just bought himself a Toronto Blue Jays hat. He had bought it at the game, and it had cost him $45. Now, he said that he knew Encarnacion had done this before, but he had watched it on the TV from his living room, and it didn't cost him anything that time. So he decided, he didn't even know if his hat would get to the field. He decided to take it off his head and throw it because he wanted to be part of that occasion. I don't think if my hat cost me $45, I would have sent it, and I certainly wouldn't have sent this at the hockey game. We're talking today about a special occasion when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and people showed their commitment to him with various things. We've already talked about the palms that they put in front of him. A lot of people don't realize that there are very few palms in Jerusalem. If you're going to use these palm fronds for worship purposes during holy times like Passover, you either have to bring them with you or you have to pay the extra, the stadium fee, if you will, to buy them on site at the temple. And Jesus at different times had trouble with the prices being charged to people for just such an occasion. So people that had their palms already intended to use them for the Passover celebration in making what was called a lulav. They'd put a palm frond together with other branches, bind them together, and when you got a bunch of people together waving them around, it was sort of like that thing you do with your thighs, making it sound like rain. That whooshing sound made an interesting sound when everyone was doing it. So it was a bit of a sacrifice to take your palm and to throw it on the road where a donkey and other people could trample it. It was unlikely that you'd pick it up later and go to the temple and use that. You had to replace the palms that you were throwing. Other people threw their garments on the road, their robes. Now, we're not talking times now when houses are built where one person might have a walk-in closet. We're talking about people who might have had one robe. If they were lucky, they might have two. Usually they had more than one undergarment. But what they were wearing was what they had to wear in most instances. So this was a sacrifice as well, to take the robe off your back and to either, as we're told, turn it into a saddle for Jesus on the animals themselves, or to strew those on the road where they're going to be trampled and might not be usable again. You know, I think of that. My dad was one of 7 kids, and he grew up in Toronto. He had 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and the boys had one room and the girls had another. Most of the closets that they're making in these new houses are bigger than either of those rooms. And I've been to Toronto. I've been on Hampton Avenue. I've seen the house where my dad grew up. And when I heard from my cousins that there used to be 60 people crammed in there for Sunday dinner at Grandma's, I just shake my head. There is no way you could fit that many people in that place. So these people that were taking off their garments and putting them on the road had a tremendous sacrifice. There was always also the sacrifice of whoever it was who owned those 2 donkeys. The young foal that had never been ridden and its mother. And the disciples went in, started taking them. He said, "What are you doing?" They said, "The master has need of them." And they let them go. That was quite a sacrifice. So at some point on that day, people had to decide whether they were on board or not. And we know that there was a mixture of opinion in the crowd, because at least one of the Pharisees went up to Jesus and said, "Put a stop to this." Didn't like the noise being made, Hosanna in the highest. Didn't like the spectacle that was being made. Didn't like the crowd gathering. Now, there's always someone who wants to rain on your parade. And we find again and again that the Pharisees and Jesus didn't see eye to eye. But in that crowd, there were a lot of people who had to make a decision. Are they with Jesus or are they not? Are they with him enough to throw their branches and their clothes on the road to make this into a special occasion, or are they going to sit back from that and just watch? Or are they going to complain about it? Now, there are a couple of things that I want to look at here. One of those things is that life has its ups and downs. Probably has more downs than we want to admit. And we celebrate the fact that God is with us at good times and at bad times. But Jesus is clear that when the good times happen, celebrate. Even he knew on that particular day, as he rode into Jerusalem, that bad times were coming for him and for his followers. And so, if you want the strength to see it through that difficult time, take time to celebrate when it's right before you. And a lot of people, as I said, wanted to rain on his parade. They wouldn't take the time to celebrate when it was right before them. The other thing is that it was right before them. Something that had been planned for years. Something that had been prophesied. Even his coming into town on a donkey. Even the strewing of the place with garments and branches from trees and even palm branches. And some people still couldn't get on board. Well, what do you do when that happens? Jesus went up onto a hill, onto the Temple Mount, and he looked out over the city. And as much as he celebrated with his disciples and with children, the Hosanna singers and the people that that committed themselves and their garments and even donkeys, that was a minority. And Jesus realized it. There were more people in Jerusalem who either were oblivious to what was going on around them or were opposed to it. And all he could do was cry. Because this was the city of peace, Jerusalem. And here, peace was coming to them in a way that they wouldn't get otherwise. And they missed that opportunity. And it was time to cry. And so we are all put in that situation, whether at hockey games or baseball games or in the company of other people of faith, either to commit to what is going on, to get on board, or to sit back from it. As we go through the events of this Holy Week, we celebrate some things, we commiserate with Jesus around other things. But it is a time for us to continue what level of commitment we would offer if we were in that crowd on that first Palm Sunday. Thanks be to God. Amen.